Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thanks for joining us already. Assalamu alaikum to Dr. Imran and Brother Abbas.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
How are you doing?
So racism, a very broad topic that we've obviously discussed, and it's quite relevant, obviously, with recent events going on. So I'm glad we're doing it, and I think it'd be interesting to see where the conversation leads, I guess. But I think we were discussing, weren't we, to start with perhaps defining racism, which I think is for me, it's quite a job as it is, because there are various definitions of it. So do you want to start with that, Imran, the definition of
Actually,
racism?
if I can, sorry, just butt in, sorry. I just want to apologize to the people that are waiting. We got on late just because of my problems with my green screen and lighting. So I always feel very guilty if I'm late. So please forgive me. And then, sorry, Imran, please do start with the definition of.
Alhamdulillah, Jazakallah Khair. I think we're all to blame a little bit, actually.
Yeah.
So, it's really a topical thing at the moment, and unfortunately, the topic of racism, and we actually planned to do this quite a long time ago, and it's just happened that we've had all of the happenings in America are going on, so it's become very sort of pertinent, and I think it's always best to start out with definitions. And this is one of those places where you will have a lot of, I find I have a lot of difficulty sort of nailing this down. And I think that there's three different types of things that are happening. So there's prejudice, which is having some sort of dislike for another racial or ethnic group, and sort of believing in that there's some validity to that, and you can have that prejudice within you. But then if that prejudice just remains within you, but you don't enact that in any way, then that's just your personal prejudice that you're aware of. And then obviously if you then use that prejudice to then carry out certain actions that may harm individuals, then that becomes discrimination. So then you're discriminating against somebody based upon your prejudices that you hold. And I think that that's when things start to become problematic, because now you're taking your internal prejudice and it's acting out and affecting other people. Then it starts to become discriminatory, and that can be ethnically, religiously, culturally, whatever that might be. So even things like bigotry and these things would fall into that. And if you were to say something horrible to somebody based upon their color, that would be a racist statement. But would it be racism as in the definition? I think it's very difficult to say. But racism is more when you have this discrimination and it's taken more to a systemic level, an institutional level, or state level. And then that becomes permeated within society. And that's when it becomes very difficult and to see, because it's everywhere. It's like if you have some fish swimming in water and another fish goes by who's a lot older and says, "How are you liking the water?" And then the other fish, they go past this older fish, and then a few minutes later they go, "What's water?" Because they've never considered the environment in which they're in. It's just part of it. And I think that when racism becomes state level or institutional level, it has much more of an impact, because it's all around us, but actually it's much harder to see. So it's not easy to just put down a definition of racism. So I think there's a lot of prejudice, a lot of discrimination, and you can see institutional or state racism, which is a much more dangerous phenomenon and actually much harder to see. And I think that leads to us checking ourselves maybe more regularly to see if we have conscious biases, i.e. we're aware of our prejudices, or unconscious biases. Is it just the water that we're swimming in? And we're not even seeing the effects that we're having on people around us. It's sort of, so maybe not a definition, but something to think about. So ultimately, racism is a discrimination based upon the prejudice of people based upon their maybe their race or their ethnicity, or even their culture, but taken to an institutional level where it's rampant throughout the society and taken as norm.
Inshallah. I remember, before I obviously Abbas as well, because I was really interesting. For me, the term institutional. So I get the term from institutional, maybe from maybe when the Met Police chief said there's institutional racism with the police. I understand it within a country that we live in. Is this something that's also global, like the institutional racism? Is it all around the world? Because for me, I'm trying to work out what this means in terms of the historical consequence of it, whether it's we're obviously aware of what happened in the past, and often say, the victors write the history, and then they move on to sort of get the power. But by institutional racism, are we talking about a global thing, or are we keeping it into institutions? Just a quick question to clarify in my mind.
Is that to, were you asking Abbas?
To you, Imran, and then Abbas can come with definition.
So this is why it's hard to pin down. So definitely within a society, there will be institutions that affect people. So courts, police, healthcare, these sorts of institutions that affect people all around us, and directly. And in those places, there will be people who may hold these prejudices. Now, if an individual judge, for example, is making pretty one-sided decisions about an individual, then that would be, I would say that's a prejudice or maybe a racist individual, but I wouldn't make that institutional. But if it was institutional, so if you compare the sentences given to in the UK, black people compared to say white people, or non-white people compared to white people, there's a 20% disproportionality. So for anyone indicted of a crime that's sort of convicted in court, the sentences on average are 20% longer if you're not white. So that is not explainable by individuals. That then becomes a institutional thing. Now that's at the state level, but actually this can be much wider. So because different countries have had, I won't say the West generally, but different countries have had different amounts of control over different parts of the world. Ultimately, they've inculcated their ideas of being the superior people into those societies. So let's take India, for example. The British came and they ruled that area, for example. They made the administrative language English. So anything that we needed to be done had to be done in English. In fact, there are more English-speaking people in Pakistan, for example, than there are Englishmen in England. I mean, that's just basic fact, because all of the vast majority of schools, they teach English medium, and people learn English language as one of the primary languages. And there is a mindset that whatever is Western is superior, that's built into the people almost. And so that then becomes another type of level. So maybe even beyond institutional and an international type of racism. But that's sort of almost self-perpetuated, like we buy into the myths that were fed to our ancestors, for example. So it's a great question. And I don't think there's an easy, straightforward answer. So it is the state, and it is more than the state.
Yeah, sure.
I'll give you an example. If you look at the number of people, look at the people who went before the Hague, for example, for international war crimes. I think 2 white people. I think who was that? I think they're both from the Serbian wars. Okay, everyone else has been as African. Everyone. So, and then we have people like Tony Blair and George Bush, who have been involved in dubious decisions about war, where many millions of people have been killed, and they just say sorry and they can carry on with their lives and be respected. So that's even at that level, the people who are held accountable for things that are not deemed good and are the people who happen to be in those cultures that were ruled in the past. So it's actually very complicated, and actually it's very widespread. So I hope that was a bit of an answer. I know I've rambled.
Yeah, no, that did. Abbas, so we're looking at the definition of racism.
I think that I think Imran is very right, actually, that it is very difficult to put racism into just one very well-defined box, and that we can sort of very analytically analyze a person's behavior or their actions, or their words, and then just sort of put them into that box of being racist. And I think he's very right. It's very difficult. And I think so the gray area for me comes into like things like Islamophobia that we're seeing around the world at the moment, where a lot of it is actually anti-Arab, let's say Asian rhetoric, especially what we're seeing, for example, in England. In other countries in Europe, it might be North African, racism against North African people. Here, it's more Indian, Pakistani, let's say Bangladeshi people. And you find that a lot of these actions, these ill actions, let's say, which are regarded to be anti-Islam, actually are more to do with race than actually to do with religion. And so that's why it's such a gray area and such a difficult area. And this is why people can very easily hide being racist by pretending that they're just anti-Islam or anti-this or anti-that. And so for me, actually, I like to keep the definition a simple definition, which I believe is an umbrella which can actually cover most racist acts. And I would say it really just stems from bigotry, a dislike of a person or a people based upon not just their race, but their religion. So for example, what makes an English person racist against a Scottish person? They're both white. So you can't say it's anti-white. And if that person is sort of Scottish, but they live just south of the border and they're actually living in England, is it okay then to be anti that person because they've got a slight Scottish accent? Do you see my point here?
Yeah.
It becomes very difficult. So I would suggest that, for me anyway, if there's bigotry involved, a claim to feel superior on the basis of your ethnicity, your color, even your religion, I think personally, I think that it should fall into that definition. So racism and bigotry for me are cut from the same cloth, quite frankly. They're the same thing. And I think and I think that, just finishing, I think the problem here is that otherwise we have people who can hide being bigots when in fact they're really racists. And that's the problem, I think. Sorry, Imran, you were.
I was actually going to make the same thing. So it's almost like a get out clause. You hear that phrase, Islam is not a race.
Yeah.
But actually, if you look at the majority of people who are sort of Muslims in the country, even still, it's mostly non-white people.
They're brown,
it's a way of absolutely. It's a way of being prejudiced towards individuals or groups of individuals.
Yes.
And escaping the title of racist because you're not referring. You say, well, I'm not referring to their color. What color is a Muslim? You get these sorts of phrases thrown at you, but actually, if you look at the interaction, it's the same sort of things. And all you got to do is really look at if you look at the newspaper headlines. I mean, they will tell you some of the newspaper headlines that were being put out that these views about Muslims, because you can say them without referring to race specifically, they fall into a grey area where even the law sort of is not sure what to make of it.
Yeah.
So, I think there's loads and loads of. You've come across these headlines all the time. I think I had a list of them somewhere here. So, if you were able, so things like, the halal secret of Pizza Express, or Britain goes halal but nobody tells the public, or jihadi killers on our streets, or millions are eating halal food without knowing it, or Muslim plot to behead so and so, or the term Muslim is in there, and the
Subway took away our bacon. I remember
absolutely
that one.
Muslims tell us how to run our schools. These are sorts of. This is taking a shot at a whole load of people, a whole group of people, looking at one aspect of them, and making it okay to do that because it's why it's on the headlines of the newspapers. And if you said that about other protected minorities, and it doesn't make it right that that they should be. I'm not saying that they should also be having this. No, I'm saying no one should be having to face this. If you look at the fact that it's on the headlines of the newspaper, it makes it okay. So being prejudiced against Muslims has passed what they call the dinner table test. You can have that discussion on a nice meal about these Muslims coming in and taking over. But because it's not specifically color that you're referring to, it can sort of slip underneath. But actually, it is the type of bigotry, and I agree. I was just going to highlight that point that you were making.
What's interesting is obviously you both have slightly. I would say you both brought up different definitions, but are both definitions we all use, and that's where this becomes hard. I think Abbas mentioned about Islamophobia. For me, I feel like the Jews were able to make up their own definition of anti-Semitism. So that was created by them. Muslims tried to do this last year, I think, and it was thrown out. And so Muslims were well aware that obviously there is racism within Islamophobia. It's a brown man with a beard. We know that Sikhs were being attacked as Islamophobic attacks. Yet Muslims weren't able to afford that. And I feel like racism is similar as well. I feel like who better to actually make this or decide the definition rather than perhaps the victims of racism. And I've looked at some definitions from famous black people of racism, and they all talk about the systemic, the institutional, the fact that perhaps me as a white person, because I experienced the Nation of Islam, I felt being racist towards me. But under their definition, what they would say, this is racial prejudice, because their racism towards me isn't really going to affect me in my daily life. It's not really going to have much of an impact on me as a white person. So there's that power difference in that. And that's where I think I find this topic really interesting. But I think I agree with Abbas as well, that if you're, we'd all say if someone's literally making a comment about someone just because of their nationality, because of the color of their skin, we'd outright say this bloke's racist, wouldn't we?
Yeah.
So I kind of feel like we're working with two definitions. But like I say, I think for me, I always think the victims should be the people that are able to, like the Jews are afforded that thing to actually have that make up the definition for the word, because they're on the receiving end of it.
Yeah.
And that's an important point, because the thing is that in this country, it is illegal to be anti-Semitic. And quite frankly, as Imran has alluded to that already, quite rightly so, there should not be a tolerance for people to be anti-Semitic. It's also illegal to be anti-Sikh. Sikhs are protected under the racial laws within England because they're regarded as a race from Punjab. And I agree that they should be protected. I don't believe that it's acceptable for people to be anti-Sikh. Muslims are not afforded that right at the moment, and that is fundamentally wrong. Jews are seen as a race, as Semites, and therefore it's regarded as anti-Semitism. Now, again, I'm not trying to trying to excuse racism against Jews, for example, because I think it's abhorrent and I think it's absolutely disgusting when people are anti-Semitic. But the reality is that there are a lot of Jews, for example, who are from Northern Europe, from Russia, and actually are not Semites. They're not Semitic. Now, I don't believe that we should relax the laws and allow those people to be dealt with in a way that would be deemed to be racist, because it's fundamentally a very evil thing, quite frankly. And the result of that, we've had many episodes in history which are deeply troublesome, deeply shocking, and absolute stains in history. But I do believe that Muslims deserve the same level of courtesy, the same level of protection, and the same rights that are afforded to other people as well. And as Imran, I think, quite clearly said, we're not talking about diluting their rights or allowing people to be bigoted and racist towards them, but we would like to be afforded the same level of respect.
I think one of the arguments that's put against this is freedom of speech. Well, if you're gonna prevent people from speaking about against Islam or criticizing Islam, then you're just curtailing freedom of speech. And I think if you look at the Jewish experience, I mean, I'm a non-Jew, so forgive me if I'm sort of generalizing, but obviously the suffering of the Jews through history has been a horrific thing, and particularly at the hands of sort of the Europeans in the last century, it's been absolutely one of the worst stains on humanity. And I think that long level of suffering has finally engendered some maybe recognition that the Jews need to be given a level of protection that wasn't afforded to them before. And so I think it's quite right that that's the case. I think the Muslims we have to maybe be more vociferous in the way we put ourselves across and maybe make our arguments much better. But this is something that can be, I think, quite argued and put forward, that people who are specifically targeting Muslims are doing so because of probably a racial prejudice that's underlying it. But there is this definition of the race being specifically at an ethnicity, which we don't fall into at the moment. But obviously, there's other ways of protecting people. I mean, you mentioned the Sikhs. I mean, I'm Punjabi. Most of the Punjab is in Pakistan, and when India was divided, the majority of the Punjab state was in Pakistan, and so, I mean, I would, because I'm not a Sikh, though, that's not an identity afforded to me. But I speak the same language, I eat the same food, I just have a different religion. But because of that, so I don't think they have a claim to the ethnicity of Punjabi, because here I am an example of a Punjabi who's not a Sikh. But they do have a claim to, they have made that argument and have won that right. So maybe I'm not saying that shouldn't have happened. What I'm saying is that maybe Muslims need to make better arguments and maybe represent themselves in a way that we are heard, and then we can take on, and like Jordan said, establish our own standards in terms of what would be considered Islamophobic and who should be covered by that. Yeah,
I think Abbas's point about the fact that it's not illegal, to be Islamophobic, as I say. Yeah. I personally think we need a new term, because people just play words and say, well, it's not a phobia, it's not irrational, and people kind of play around with the word. I think we definitely need a term for the undoubtable kind of witch hunt against Islam that there is.
Because even you've faced that, haven't you, Jordan? In the sense that you were telling me that people have called you for becoming Muslim. They've called you things like traitor, etc., and these sorts of things.
Yeah, right? It's a very, very interesting experience, because I can talk about my experiences pre-Shahada and things like that, and I don't really remember anything that I can pinpoint as a racial prejudice towards me. But yeah, becoming Muslim, suddenly I found myself in a minority, somehow. But I think that there is still, I did a video on white privilege the other day. There's still white privilege with it, even as a Muslim, I would say, as a white Muslim. But yeah, certainly, I think my fellow Englishman certainly has a different view of me under Islam. Whereas if I would have said I was a Buddhist or something like that, they'd probably shake my hand and go, "Wow, that's really cool." Yeah. Becoming a Muslim has all of a sudden made me some kind of barbaric, guy that's possibly on his way to Syria. So it's definitely bizarre, the mindset and it runs deep. The people I'm talking about aren't people that you would necessarily term as racist, but these things seep into public consciousness, don't they? And I think that's the worry for me about Islamophobia. And it's the same for, I'm sure, black people receiving it when words and attitudes become normal, and that's why I think the fight against it has to always be there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think the danger is, Jordan, that people can rationalize anything to themselves. So you hear people will say things like, "Oh, well, Asians, I'm anti-Asian because they're like this, because they do this. It's not because I'm a bad person. It's not because I'm not thinking things through rationally or reasonably," but they'll find a way of playing the mental gymnastics to justify their bigotry and their hatred and their racism towards the people. Black people are like this because they've read this or they've heard that, or at the moment there are these viral videos going around of, young black men in gang warfare or whatever, and they're killing each other. And then from that, they extrapolate that all black people somehow have this collective sin, this collective flaw in their character. So it's very easy to rationalize anything. The issue is that if people who are watching this stream and are fellow Muslims and non-Muslims really want to understand racism, they really need to first understand where this is stemming from, where this is coming from, and who are the main players. At the moment, we can talk about historical racism, and I think, yes, we learn from history, and hopefully we try not to make the same mistakes as were made before, even though I think there's a famous saying of Voltaire that, I forget the saying now. Actually, it was about people, making the same mistakes over and over again. Basically, they don't learn from their mistakes. I forgot the saying completely, but so it's about educating yourself really, and recognizing that bigotry and racism fundamentally has to be wrong. And it has to be wrong because you yourself would not want to be treated in that way. That's why it's fundamentally wrong. You don't need to go into a long analysis. And there was a very interesting American, I forget her name actually, but she's done quite a lot. I've forgotten her name. Does quite a lot of work with racism and anti-racism and sort of, trying to make people think. And often in a large auditorium, she will ask the question, which is predominantly filled by, white people in America. She'll say, I'd like anyone who would like to be treated as a black person, a person of color, African American.
I've watched this before. This is really great.
To stand up. If you would like to be treated like an African American, a person of color, I'd like you to stand up. And she's done this loads of times. And you'll have not a single person standing up. And so then she'll say that now you're reflecting, you realize that there is a problem, even though perhaps before you came into here, you weren't able to accept it as such. So a lot of people, now, of course, I want to put a caveat in, and I was discussing this with Imran before as well, that there is racism everywhere. We're not talking about just the white man is racist. Everyone has racism. The difference that we have at the moment, as Imran alluded to, was that we have powerful nations that have institutionalized racism. And so, yes, you'll find racism in India. You'll find racism in Pakistan. This is a human trait. This is not something specific only to white people. Black people can be racist. White people can be racist. Asian people can be racist. But at the moment, we have a media, a financial hub, and huge amounts of investment that are unfortunately predominantly coming from white nations, such as the US, such as countries in Europe, for example, where we have these huge movements and huge amounts of money that is being pumped into this industry of hate and division that is actually causing huge problems. Now, one of the evidences for this is that it's now coming to light that in America, where we're having these demonstrations, there are white anarchists who are deliberately hijacking some of these demonstrations and causing mayhem and problems in order to create more racial tension between African Americans and other Americans who are not African American, for example, right? So, and this is not happening by accident. So we have to understand that there is an industry that has a lot of money and a lot of backing. I mean, we had Steve Bannon, for example, who came to England, and I believe he met, our Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. He also went and met Wilders in Holland and other very right-wing organizations in Europe. This is a guy with a lot of money and a lot of backing. And they're pushing this agenda through the media. They're pushing this agenda through social media, sending out false information, false posts, because they want to create this rift, because they make money from creating this rift. And it's a way of taking action against people of color to keep them down, to suppress them. Because you see, when you propagate and encourage this type of bigotry and hatred, there's going to be a reaction, you see. And so when you have the reaction, you're able then to bring many draconian laws to suppress those people even more.
It doesn't have to be draconian.
Sorry, Imran, yeah.
Even about, I mean, you're absolutely right what you're saying. But it doesn't have to be draconian. It can be very, very benign, but have a profound impact. I mean, if you look at, I think I was a few days ago, I was talking about the Jordan, we were just generally speaking. If you look at where the vast majority of the most experienced, most highly paid, most well-resourced teachers work. They work in the higher social economic classes, majority white people. And if you look at where the most and the students who tend to do very well in their studies, therefore, tend to be those students. And if you look at where the least experienced or the newly qualified teachers are working, where there's worse pay, the least resources, this will be in the areas where there's lower social economic opportunities and where there's a larger mix of ethnic minorities. And this is then what you're doing is you're creating generational divides. Now you notice I didn't just say color, because obviously we know that working class white lads tend to do much worse than even some people who are from a background of people who've come into the country maybe 1 or 2 generations before. And that's because it's not as simple as a class as a race thing, but it's a class thing as well. If you look at things like 93% of the police force in the UK is white. And that's for me, that's an amazing statistic, because it doesn't represent the population who are being policed, and we police by consent here in the UK.
Would you say, Imran, that black people obviously are not going to be in the police force, especially, I mean, we talk about current events, but I think there's very much an attitude that if you are, you're sort of going to the other side, aren't you? When you look at the kind of, the chief of police already said there's institutional racism in there. Absolutely. So I think black people almost view the black policemen as sellouts or joining the kind of.
I'm trying to remember the statistics for the stops and searches, but I think from what I remember rightly, of all of the, I think how many times more likely are you to be stopped? Because all of the stops and searches in London, I think about half of them are, half of all the stops and searches that happen in London. And if you look at London, the vast majority of people that are stopped, are going to be non-white. So about 40% are white people, and the rest is made up of. So again, 40% of that then is black, and then the rest are made up the other other minorities. So it's disproportionately targeting those people who are of color, and imagine let's put a face to this experience. So you could be 12, 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old who the police will stop and then, search you. And you're going through the experience, not once, not twice, but on multiple occasions. Just because for some reason, you're deemed to be someone who, is suspicious for whatever that might be. And these are narratives that are placed into society, into people's minds. So the officers, either themselves, are doing what they think is, almost like normal, but even their stop and search strategies, there's some inherent bias in that. And I think it's really important that we take these sorts of things in. So if you look at all of the people who are judges, for example, I think 97% of all of the people who work in the Crown Prosecution Service are not white. So imagine. Sorry, 97% are white. So the rest is just a tiny amount. So that there has to be some sort of, if I were to look at the police force, would they represent me, or would they represent the community that I'm from? I'd have to say no. And we need to overcome that. Maybe, and I'm not talking about quotas. I'm not talking about sort of, but I'm talking about making people feel welcome and incorporating them into. If I incorporate them into your institution so that then they can reflect whatever's happening and understand. So I know if an Asian Muslim police officer were to stop me, we would have an understanding to a certain level about what I might be doing compared to somebody else who didn't have that understanding. I remember once I was stopped once I was on my way to university. I was studying medicine at the time, and I think I can't remember, the officer stopped me, and I can't remember why they stopped me. Just this random stop, the random stops that happened. And they asked me to they said, we can search your bag. And I said, yeah, you can search my bag. And there's nothing, go for it. So he said, so I started taking all this stuff out of my bag so they could have a look. And I had like metal implements, I had things that we used to examine people, and all these things were clunking, coming. I was thinking, oh god, this doesn't look good, all this stuff coming out. And then the officer saw my stethoscope and he said, oh, what do you do? And he said, I said, well, I'm a medical student. And he goes, what year are you? And I explained, and he said, okay, that's fine. So suddenly his perception of me in knowing that had changed. Oh, this guy's not one of those people I thought he was.
Yeah.
But he couldn't really give me a reason why. I don't know. Maybe I had a big beard at the time. I was studying for exams a bit. So he'd made some sort of judgment about it. But at the time, I was surrounded by 3 or 4 officers. It was, they were. I'm an Asian guy, so I'm not the tallest. They were all 6 foot plus, and it was quite an intimidating situation. But I had to just be calm and complied, etc. But now that for me, that was quite a tough experience. Now imagine this happening to you, day in, day out. You're walking to school, coming back from school, going to work, just because of the way you look. People are making, and eventually that will make that's going to create resentment, and it's going to bring about sort of responses that are not conducive to a normal society. And I think that's reflective in this. It's important that we then reflect our societies in our institutions, so that we have less of this sort of non-intelligent, non-targeted stop and search type of things, or it doesn't. I don't think it makes that much of a difference personally.
Yeah.
Imran, I'm sort of slightly of a different view, and I'd like your opinion on that, really, which is that I can understand sometimes where there might be profiling done where, for example, being Muslim, if it was analytically and empirically proven, and I don't think it has been actually, the exact opposite is true, but if it is proven, let's say, that people getting on an aeroplane, if they look like me and they're Muslim, there is a much higher chance of them committing an act of terrorism, for argument's sake. Is it then reasonable for them to target me more than perhaps they would target a single mum who was white with a baby with her, for example? Would you think that was wrong, or do you think that's sensible? Because my view is that as a Muslim, if there is an increased threat, because unfortunately we have a minority of people who are doing some things that are quite bad, and that they target me because proportionally, maybe on that particular act, that particular environment, I might be more likely to be engaged in something like that. As long as it's done respectfully, and I emphasize respectfully, because often it's not done respectfully and sensitively. Personally, I don't have a problem with that. Do you think that's a wrong way to look at it, or?
So there's a problem with this understanding. So I think, from my perspective, so I think you're right. It seems sensible on the surface that if it looks like a duck, it quacks like a duck, it's going to be a duck. Yeah,
right.
And this is this analogy that it's not going to be this old white-haired lady. It's going to be this bearded brown guy. Yeah. So first of all, what that does, now just understand, we've just said that you couldn't ethnically define a Muslim, but actually for these searches we are doing that.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. So we're definitely saying, okay, the other thing is look at the experience on the ground, what actually happens on the ground. So we have examples of people going on holiday to Turkey with all their family, 4 or 5 kids, mum, being stopped, held for 6 hours, missing their flight.
Yeah.
Having to, after being asked loads of questions, having their information taken from their laptops and from all of this done, and then being sent home. Yeah. Separated out, during this time, not being told where anyone is, day in, day out, routinely. If you look in the States, there's almost like 2 lines.
Oh yeah.
There's the white line, and then there's the random search line, which is all the other people.
Yeah.
And if you look at the experience on the ground, it doesn't work. It's the net that is being cast is too wide, and you drag everyone into that, and that doesn't help your scenario. You need to bring the population that you think that the problem may be coming from on your side, and these things actually cause the opposite effect. The way to do it is to use intelligence. Is there a credible threat? Yes. Who is the threat coming from? Okay, let's monitor these people, and then we can pick up those individuals. But if you then criminalize the whole people, then what you do is you create resentment in these people, and you get less help from them. Yeah. So I think that overall, I mean, it makes sense, but actually you detract from your effectiveness as a force. Yeah. And I think that really we shouldn't be just stopping everyone just because we should be targeting people. I mean, even I forget the name of the person that was shot on the tube getting on the
Oh, Menendez.
Menendez, yeah, that's right. I mean, he was not Asian, not white. He just happened to be slightly dark, slightly not. He's a not white guy. He's jumping over. They say he jumped over some barriers. He was shot. I mean, how many times in the head by police officers? You know, there was no reason. If it was an intelligent-less process, it would have been clear that this is not the individual who was at fault. And I think we have to be much more nuanced in our approaches. We're a technological society. We have access to all sorts of data. We really know who people are in terms of threat and who isn't. And what we should be doing is targeting our and then what will happen? I mean, Muslims are not. You know, my father was fighting for the British in the Boer Wars. My grandfather was fighting for the British in the Boer Wars. You know, literally, my family has spilled blood for where we are now in the UK.
Yeah.
And not just me, millions of Indians, millions and millions of people from Africa, because we were at that time the manpower was needed to fight the wars, and people were brought over. And they did this, and so we have literally, you know, as much of an interest in making sure that Britain is a wonderful place for people to live, people are getting on well, as anyone else. And in fact, our religion, if anything, it invites us to make the area that we live in an amazing area. Be good to your neighbors. Be, you know, good to the environment. If you see something in the road, move it out of the way. This is an act of charity, so it doesn't disturb other people. I mean, the teachings are amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with you actually, Imran, because, you know, I remember a police officer saying, well, you know, we target the people that we feel are perhaps most likely to be carrying out certain acts. So I remember there was a big, obviously, conversation about Afro-Caribbean young men being stopped grossly, disproportionately to everybody else. But I thought to myself, well, you know, the police officer does seem to have a point. You know, if a particular community, whether it's Asian or white or black, you know. But then I remember that a few people called in, and I remember one Afro-Caribbean young man called in. He was at university or just finished university, whatever, educated young man, you know. And he said, but I've been stopped 24 times.
Yeah. And
then that's when it sort of did hit me, and it sort of struck me that actually the problem with that type of mentality is that it's too, as you said, the net is too wide.
Yeah.
And there are too many chances for abusing that power.
It's open for abuse.
And I think we've got this beautiful saying, obviously, innocent until proven guilty. And I think when you are pulled over, and I've been pulled over, for example, in Dubai or whatever, asking, you know, why I'm going regularly, because at the time I had a business or whatever. When you're innocent, it actually does feel incredibly intrusive. And it does feel incredibly, you become quite disheartened, because you sort of think that even though you could logically you can understand that it's done for this reason or that reason, but on an emotional level, it's quite hurtful that they've sort of put you in the same boat as somebody who's a criminal.
See, not only does it criminalize you in the sense that, you know, you're on paper somewhere, and also you have people who then take on the fact that maybe I don't belong here. Maybe these guys are targeting because I am different. So it otherizes you. Maybe even in your own mind, it otherizes you. So it's harder for you to fit into the society. But this is all fed from the narrative that somehow the black on black violence that we're seeing in London is somehow related to the blackness of the people. And that's a big mistake.
Yes.
It's
absolutely.
got nothing to do. The crime that we're seeing in London that happens to be in areas where people are, you know, from ethnic minorities, mainly black, is not because of the blackness of the people. This is the problem with the understanding.
Yeah, it's
to do with the socioeconomic circumstances of the people. So if you went back, and because there's always been gangs. I mean, you've seen that film. What was that? Gangs of London. You know, there have always been gangs. There's always been knife crime. There's always been muggings. It's not a new phenomena. It's just the demographic of the people have changed. If you went back further, it would have been white working class lads who are having these same beefs in the past, and that would never have been. No one would go to Glasgow and say, "Look at all these people stabbing and killing themselves in Glasgow." These young guys. Something about their whiteness is causing this. or something about their culture is causing this. And the reason that's not said is because that would call into effect this systemic, this institutionalized understanding of who white people are in terms of, being the sort of the intellectual, benevolent people who go around, so apologies if I'm sort of generalizing too much, but actually it's to do with the socioeconomic classes. So the way that you improve these people's lives is to help them, get them into some, help them with the situations they're having at home, get them into, good education, meaningful work, because these are intelligent young human beings who can have a lot to give, but they don't have the opportunities to provide that. And and if you just sit down for one moment with anyone from this sort of background, and I've done that in the past, the thing that will strike you is that they're really to survive in the circumstances they're surviving, it takes a huge amount of really being on your toes, in sharp intelligence, really clever individuals. And you think, wow, there's so much potential I see here, but no one's thinking about how can we harness this potential. And if you look at those environments, all these kids are, if you look at, I think most of the people, half of the people who are in prison have either been through the care system or they've visited domestic violence. There's a high proportion of mental illness. There's so many other factors that and none of them are skin color. And this is where our narrative. So when we start, if somebody, for example, if somebody, some people are stabbing other people in London, we start saying, well, what is it about black people that make them? That's the problem. That understanding is the problem. It isn't about black people. It's about these people who are in these circumstances where this is the case. And if you went back 100 years, 200 years, you'd find similar people in groups doing the similar sort of things as they were in the past. It's just it's never attributed to their color. So no one says when Jimmy Savile was doing what he was doing, what is it about white people that makes them do this? If you get some Pakistani gangs or Asian gangs in, it's suddenly, well, what is it about the Asian community or the Pakistani? It suddenly becomes the question now becomes, well, what's wrong with you people? And it's generalized. So the negative is generalized, but like I've said this in the past, but the positive is never generalized. The positive is specified. If someone happens to be black and they do a good thing, well, that guy is sort of an exception to the rule. He's a good example. Instead of saying, well, actually, you black people are really good because of this individual. They don't generalize the negative, the positive. And I think we have to be careful when we buy into that, because that's saying, well, I understand people like me are doing things so you can stop everyone who looks like me. That's a bit, we capitulate too much. We need to say, look, we understand stop and search may be necessary. Really use it really well. Use it intelligence-based and don't just stop everyone.
Can I, because I think while we're on the topic of sort of racial profiling and stop and search, bring in Raspect as well. He's backstage.
Oh, mashallah, okay.
I think we'll. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
How are you doing, brother? Assalamu alaikum.
How are you, Raspect? You okay?
Yeah, I'm okay. I've been on the Justice for George march today.
Oh, mashallah.
There was thousands and thousands of people, man. Alhamdulillah. It was a powerful turnout, man. But I lost my voice.
Alhamdulillah.
Still. But enough love to all the brothers inside, enough love to everyone out there.
Alhamdulillah.
So,
brother, Respect, for obviously our EFDawah viewers, I think, is it the first time that you've come onto one of our streams?
I watch EFDawah.
Alhamdulillah.
But
what I'd like you to do, Respect, is maybe, if you don't mind, just to let the viewers know, basically. I think you came to Islam recently, is that right?
It's been like a 2-year journey, if I keep it 100. Like,
mashallah,
from Speaker's Corner, from being exposed in Speaker's Corner. But I think one of my main issues was kind of work, because there's so much different sect differences and so much different opinions and so much scholars. It was trying to work out, like, first what was right, and what was right for me, if you get what I'm saying. But
when did you take your shahada, Respect?
I'd say Brother Isa had a big influence.
Mashallah.
May Allah give him Jannah, mashallah.
May Allah give him Jannah. He was a beautiful brother, mashallah.
I mean,
Yeah, Brother Isa and Brother Jordan, they had a giant influence.
Alhamdulillah.
And there's certain hadiths. Obviously, everyone knows my favorite one from when I came to the park, and I even memorized it was when you see an oppressor, you raise your hand and stop that oppressor. And if you can't raise your hand and stop the oppressor, speak out boldly against the oppressor. And if you can't speak out boldly, protesting in your heart, but protesting in your heart is the weakest and poorest form of protest. And like, as an activist, kind of, let's say, walking in Malcolm X's footsteps, that hadith really stuck out to me in like what I live and what I believe in, because I'm anti-oppression.
Alhamdulillah.
Go on, Abbas.
Sorry, respect. When did you take your shahada? It was about a few months back. Is that right?
Yeah, a few months back still.
MashaAllah, MashaAllah. And am I right? Are you Afro-Caribbean or are you African?
Yeah, I'd say I class myself as African, but I'm Afro-Caribbean. I do
MashaAllah, MashaAllah.
Guyanese South American roots as well.
All right, MashaAllah. Okay.
So I think what we did at the beginning, Respect, was we spent quite a bit of time defining racism. I don't know if you heard the beginning of the stream. We went through various things. So I know you've got a definition too as well, haven't you, that you would use for racism?
Yeah, for me, I don't think there was such a specification as the black and the white race as such until I'd say I look at racism as a system, and I look at racism as prejudice plus power. That's probably the best way I can, because what my main argument with atheist Steve in the park was that, you know, if people came to Africa and called us monkeys or called us the N-word, it wouldn't have mattered to us. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, if they just came and called us monkeys, called us N-word, said they didn't like our black skin, if they had all the prejudices in the world, it wouldn't have mattered to us. I think what matters is the fact that based upon these prejudices, they decided to say we was less than human beings, and then the actions that came with it. So shipping a lot of my ancestors from obviously Gambia, West Africa, Fulanis, to America and to the Caribbeans. Many of them was Muslim, but had their religion beaten out of them. As you know, the story of Kunta Kinte. I've been to Kunta Kinte's island, and I've actually met his descendants.
No, mashallah.
MashaAllah.
So that whole process of creating this system of racism, and other people was enslaved. You know, you had the Irish, you had Asians, but the level that was put towards African people was incomparable. We look at our names, our languages, our religions, our God, our folkway, our moreways. No other group in history can really relate to losing that. Like, most people have still got their family tree, they've still got their last name, they still know where their great grandfather came from. What they stole from us was something that could never be replaced, which is why you see such a big problem with identity politics in our country to this day. I'd say the only thing you could say was a notch up is what happened to the Native Americans and the Aboriginal Australians. Obviously, that was genocide. Some of us even believe that chattel slavery, the savageness of it, was a genocide attempt, but they just couldn't kill us all.
Yeah, because a lot of people died in the transfers, didn't they?
100% more people died on the way to the Americas than reached the Americas. So,
and they were simply into the sea on the way. That was the regard that was paid to the dead. Subhanallah.
100%.
I remember Respect, because I was born in the very late 60s, and I remember sort of like late 70s, maybe early 70s, actually, maybe mid 70s to late 70s, watching the episodes of Kunta Kinte. It was on TV, and at such a young age, I remember feeling this is just inherently wrong. And the surprising thing is, actually, any child probably looking at that, white, black, Asian, it doesn't matter what color you are, you would probably be, it would be, you know, stomach wrenchingly, you know, difficult, and you would recognize it as something inherently evil and bad.
Yeah, for a
And
long
it's
time.
Yeah.
For a long time, I had troubles, especially after watching Roots, and there's something called Goodbye Uncle Tom. There was a time when it made me very resentful towards white people.
Yeah.
I went through a quite a long stage, even in school. Obviously, from I was young, from I first got called the N-word in primary school, it's like I had something inherent inside me that just went crazy.
Yeah.
And then the same thing happened in my youth club. And then when we watched all Roots and that, and then obviously watching Roots alongside going past pubs in places like Romford and Chadwell Heath, where you have big men who used to come out and call us the N-word and call us monkeys. They used to chase us. So that caused a physical confrontation between me and this EDL, Tommy Robinson, this sort of person. So I had a lot of physical confrontation with them as a child, and a lot happened. And one of our friends, Tristan, he was killed in a place called Mark's Gate. And his killer's got something silly like 2 years. And that really shook me. So when I heard that the EDL was gonna be going down to Tower Hamlets one time, I decided to ride out. And I think that was my first real, let's say, meeting with Islam, because a lot of the activists was Muslim. So, low key, there was a place called The Gaff in Maryland, and they used to, they brought down the Mortal Technique and people like Logic, and used to do a lot of like revolutionary stuff. We used to go to like Spitalfields, get fruits and veg, and do food programs for homeless people, like proper activist stuff, really. And I'd say that was my first step. And that's where that's what caused my great respect of Muslims, because obviously being an activist and being out there, a lot of the people who was engaged in that activism was Muslims. You know what I'm saying?
Alhamdulillah.
And how did that? Would you say? I mean, engaging with the Muslim brothers and brothers there, did that change your opinions, say, about white people, or was it more to do with? Because I know, mashallah, brother Malcolm X, his journey originally was very sort of anti-white because of the Nation of Islam and what have you. But then I think we've got his letter actually as a link below our stream, because obviously after going to Hajj and on the pilgrimage, he came back and wrote a very touching letter explaining how, his whole concept of humanity, as it were, changed, that it wasn't about white or black. It was about, we're one community, one race, basically, the human race. And would you say that sort of influenced you? Was it like Malcolm X and these sort of amazing people in history, or was it these Muslim brothers? What changed your sort of perception about the white man, the white person, as it were? Respect, I think you're on mute at the moment.
Oh yeah.
Sorry.
I don't think I've ever had a hate for white people on the whole. I had a lot of resentment for racist people, and I had a lot of lack of trust of who was racist and who was not.
Yeah.
But remember, I was still growing up with. We still had Irish guys on the block, Polish guys on the block. Yeah. So in our communities, like, we got everyone. We've got Pakistanis, we've got everyone's there, and especially like our side of the community, because everyone's kind of urban. Like, everyone's kind of like, they kind of talk like us and walk like us to some degree. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I've never had a prejudice that is like blanket, but I've known that there's racism in different communities. Yeah. Like certain friends' houses I couldn't go to because I was black. You know what I'm saying? Whereas in my house, it was like everyone could just come to my house. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But so I experienced those things, but I always knew that was the ignorance of their parents, and I never put that on my friends who, you know what I'm saying? Everyone.
It's a very mature way of looking at things, and unfortunately, I mean, I remember when I was young, there probably was a time when I thought, you know, because I encountered so much racism in the 70s, and I started thinking when I was like 10, 12 years old, that actually white people just don't like Asian people. They don't like black people. They're just all racist. And I think it was more perhaps coming into my sort of teens, mid-teens and late teens and understanding that Islam actually prohibited that type of generalization, that I had to, you know, have some introspection and reflection on whether my beliefs were actually also racist by, you know, making all white people somehow into one defined box of racists, you know?
Yeah.
And so that was actually but for me anyway, more of a guide that I had to sort of reflect on my beliefs and say, these beliefs actually are wrong, because if I think like that, I'm actually no better than the racist who generalize.
Right. That's always been my stance. Because there's some black people, because of the racism they experience, just like Malcolm X, you know, don't trust anyone.
Yeah.
We ain't no friends. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
No one likes us. There's that mentality, but that mentality can lead to like being racially prejudiced to another community.
Right.
You know, even though we don't have the power to execute anything, it's not going to affect anyone in banking or school or any institution in this society. That's why I wouldn't say it's on the same level as institutional racism. You know, at the same time, man don't want to hurt no feelings. And the main thing I always said from I was young is I don't want to turn into the same thing that I dislike so much.
Sure.
100%. Yeah.
I wouldn't want to transform into that. So if I was hating people because of where they're from, it would kind of defeat the object of me being against people hating me because of where I'm from.
Sure.
I'd become a hypocrite, I think.
Yeah.
So, and like, obviously, even when I went to those like Tower Hamlets marches, you've always got a couple white guys, and those white guys are experts on racism as well. You know what I'm saying? They'll teach you something. You know what I'm saying? They'll teach you stuff about India and Pakistan you man didn't know. You know what I'm saying? They'll teach you stuff about Africa and the Caribbean that I didn't know. Like this, they teach you about white privilege. They teach you about institutional racism. So I've always had those guys, even though, you know, there might not be droves. Even today at the protest, the amount of one thing I'm always about is when it comes to racism, like the black community has to turn up and have some form of self-sufficiency, because if it doesn't, then it's always going to be relying on others and put itself in a weak point. You know what I'm saying? But at the same time, today, not only did you have the turnout from the community, but you had so many different people from so many different places. Man from Portugal, man from Poland, man from Brazil, like man from everywhere. And I don't think there was a country that didn't represent today. You know, and it was so young. It was different to the Tommy Robinson rallies, which are a lot of the time, you know, older people. You know what I'm saying? Like they're normally in their 50s, 60s, people like Bacon Lady. You know, you know what I'm saying? That's who's the Tommy Robinson rally. But today, it was the youth of the UK that turned up, which was very, very, very powerful, because it gives me some hope, and it makes me think that the future can be brighter than the now. You know,
Absolutely.
But what for me, one of the main things that that really propelled me against racism is when I went to Jamaica, and I started to learn about my roots and my culture. You know what I'm saying? So that was my foundation. And there was a speech, that basically said, "Until the color of a man's skin is no more significant than the color of his eye, everywhere is war." Yeah, and that statement stood up to me a lot, and it was quite a reminder of like even the last sermon. You know what I'm saying? It's,
absolutely.
I'm saying in sentiment, but basically what it was saying to me on one hand is, if I judge someone by the color of their eyes, their skin, and I make their skin more significant than their eyes, then I'm the one creating the war. But it also reminds me that while people look at my skin as more important than the color of my eyes, I'm in some form of war. I'm in some form of battle. So that battle is against, you know, racism, especially institutional racism. I couldn't really care too much about even fringe prejudices. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think unless the fringe prejudice comes with a hateful statement towards my race. So, for example, if someone didn't want me to marry their daughter because they want to keep it in the family, I don't see that as racism. But then when you get to like what Muslim Bilal went through, where the mum said that she felt sick that he was black, that's where my issue is now. You know what I'm saying? So like fringe prejudices, they don't affect me at all. It's institutional racism that's going to affect my life, where I've got a real problem. You know what I'm saying? And see that with the George Floyd, like the officer knew he could sit there. He felt so comfortable and cool. He was just chilling on his neck. He knew the people was too scared to move him off. He knew he thought to himself, he probably wouldn't even get arrested, to be honest. That's the confidence that they have because of institutional racism. But yeah, if a church shooter goes in and kills 15 people in a black church, they'll take him to Burger King.
Yeah.
So that's the difference. You could be unarmed and not in a non-violent position and not have done any harm to anyone, and you can still be shot down. You got Tamir Rice, Sandra Bland, Mike Brown, Trayvon Martin. Like George Floyd is just one out of many people who have the same story.
Absolutely. And I think it's the
sorry Imran, respect, you were just referring to the shooter in Texas, right? Who went into a church and shot 15 black people. Is that right?
Dylan Roof.
Dylan Roof.
Yeah.
And then he apparently told the police officers that he was hungry. So they actually took him to a Burger King on the way to jail. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, got a Whopper meal.
SubhanAllah.
Yeah. Imran, sorry, I beg your pardon. You were sort of about to speak.
I think it's really the problem. The problem really is because the racism or the prejudice is so systemic that the institutions themselves are affected by it. And there is this narrative that anyone who's black, particularly if we're talking about the USA, is looked upon automatically just because of their blackness as being aggressive. You don't have to do anything. You could be standing still and you're deemed aggressive because of the color of your skin. And the response to these people is disproportionately more aggressive than in response to anybody else. Even if you're unarmed and we've had instances of children being shot with toy guns playing in the street in America by police officers. I mean, it's been that, but we had the incident of the Asian guy who made a clock that he took to school, and he was arrested. They called the police because he was brown, that this could be a bomb. And these sorts of narratives that are in absolutely,
yeah.
And this is the narratives that are in the society that then feed these institutions or that pervades the institutions, and the disproportionate representation of mainly sort of white people in the forces that enforce the law on the people is all part of the problem. But a lot of it is because it's such a high level, it's institutional racism. The average person doesn't really see this because it doesn't affect them. It's only if you're at the cold face and you're seeing. You're the one that's being stopped day in, day out. You're the one who sort of, is afraid, will I make it home from work in my car because the police might stop me day in, day out. That then you realize, I am not treated like everyone else is treated. And people often in this scenario, there's lots of complaints we're seeing about the looting. Rasper, what's your view on the looting that's happening? Because lots of people are complaining about this. And they're sort of focusing on this almost to take away from what's happened. What's your thoughts on it? Because I wanted to make a point, but I'll wait until I've heard from you.
So I'm two ways. So when we went out to the protest today, we didn't go out to just go to the protest. We went out with a mission, and it's a twofold mission. One part of the mission is to keep the peace. The other part of the mission is to protect the people, and that's from anyone. So I actually had a little punch up out there because basically some guy threw us a rock at a bus. Yeah, this bus had people in it. The bus driver wasn't doing anything wrong. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I told him stop, and he got a bit cheeky. Do you know what I'm saying? And then it got a bit peak for him. You know what I'm saying? And then there was another guy that had a skateboard and tried to smash the bus stop, and me and my brother Bugs had to roll up on him and chill him out as well. Do you know what I'm saying? Because people out there that are antagonists. I read an article. The reason why I was so rough with both of them is because I read an article about white supremacists posing as Antifa.
Absolutely.
And, starting riots. And there's places where, you know, bricks are just turning up. You know what I'm saying? There's people with another agenda trying to create violence and trying to create a race rift as well. So that's one side. The other side, though, is that if it's the other case, so this is police. So if, just like with George Floyd, if I had seen what happened with George Floyd or Russia and Charles, who died the same way in the UK in a shop in Hackney, yeah, I would have to intervene. That may mean my imprisonment. That may mean harm coming to me, but I would have to intervene in the same way that today, if police decided to be the one to try and brutalize the people like they sometimes would, I would have to be someone that steps in and stops that to the best of my ability. Now, if the police cause something like that, and then the people then start fighting back against the police, once a riot starts, and in that way, then for me, if you look historically, rioting and looting go hand in hand. Because if you're rioting for 7 days straight, you're not going to be going to your 9 to 5, and you still got to provide. So once it gets to that state of a riot, from it's not an outside force coming in and trying to create foolishness, then I understand how rioting and even looting goes on. Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
absolutely. And I think, I mean, I was talking to Jordan about this a few days ago, actually, and we were talking about the obviously there are people who want a race war, yeah, and these people are working nefariously and they're doing whatever they can to bring that about. We've had people openly say this, and in the States it's much more prolific and, you know, much more vociferous. And then we know there are people who are going about trying to cause things to become violent so that they can get there's another agenda at play. But the other side of it is, I completely agree. We were talking about the social contract. So the people agree to be governed and looked at and ruled by the people, whoever are in power, in exchange for certain things like security, like respect, like, you know, autonomy, and, you know, facilities that we are given, so food and water and healthcare, and these are the sort of, it's almost, this is a contract between the state and the individual. Now, when the state becomes oppressive and starts to kill you or attack you, and then that contract is broken, and then we return to a state of almost like lawlessness, where it's just, you know, you do what is needed to survive, and you defend yourself in whatever circumstances you find yourself in. Now, that's unfortunate, and we're not sort of condoning sort of the violence that happened, but we're trying to explain that when you have if the people who are enforcing the law are the ones who are using it to kill a specific group of people, when those people then fight back, it's going to look like what it's looking like.
Well, if they want to talk to us about looting, they just got because they got like diamonds everywhere. We got to go into the vaults of the Vatican and the museums as well. You know what I'm saying? Like,
absolutely,
the looting that the youths are doing in the streets ain't got nothing on the looting of, you know, the British Empire. Come on, let's be real.
Absolutely, yeah.
And
I mean,
people are talking about gang violence, and I've got, like, some people say my views are weird, but even when we're talking about gang violence and we're being real and honest, yeah, like the Wayne kills Johnny, both sides of our family hurt, because most of the time we're related and all linked in some way. Yeah. Jermaine goes to jail, yeah, for his crimes, and has to and Johnny's gone. Do you know what I'm saying? So this thing that's happening in our community, this epidemic of gang violence, is only hurting us. It's not hurting anyone else. It's not spilling out. But yeah, in the parliament that I was across from today, there's someone that can sign a letter, and that letter can cause bombs to be dropped on Afghanistan, bombs to be dropped on Syria, bombs to be dropped on Libya, bombs to be dropped on Iraq, and innocent women and children. Yeah, I think 1 million casualties in Afghanistan alone.
Yeah, uncounted. They didn't count them, respect, because and that's actually against the Geneva Convention, but they didn't actually count they tested, you know, the Moab. You've heard of Moab, right? Mother of all bombs.
Yeah.
And they tested. So this is the largest bomb that you can have that's not a nuclear weapon. They field tested it in Africa. It was field tested in Africa. In Afghanistan. And they call it the daisy cutter. So if you just type in daisy cutter bomb, and you can see, and this thing causes a resonance. So if you're within like I don't know how many miles of this, literally your ears will burst and you'll start bleeding from orifice. It's that severe. And this was used in these countries. We don't hear anything about this. And over 1 million people killed in Iraq. And these are horrific. And all this is usually for some sort of resource, if ultimately.
I'll point out and make it seem like we are the worst of society. When we're born on estates that look like prisons. You know what I'm saying? The lack of not only do we have a lack of opportunities, but we have a lack of faith in self. When I was growing up, I thought all I could be was a criminal. I did not think I could ever be a doctor or a teacher. I did not I didn't have that confidence in myself within the system just from the racism I'd received in school. Yeah. It didn't inspire me to go through uni. Like I have a problem with conforming to authority. You know what I'm saying? Got to conform to God. You know what I'm saying? And especially if the authority is prejudiced or oppressive. So I had certain lessons in my school, and I passed them with flying colours. But that was with lessons with teachers that were actually teachers, like teachers that wanted to be teachers, teachers that enjoyed teaching, teachers that loved the children they were teaching. But then you got another set of teachers that they just want a paycheck, and they don't give a they don't care about you. You know what I'm saying? They don't care. They don't care about us. You know what I'm saying? They, if anything, they've got certain prejudices. Yeah, and this is where institutional racism comes in. Yeah, they've got certain prejudices that they've learned through life, the media, and so on, that actually make them treat you worse than other people. So that's why we've got a very high exclusion rate and so on.
Yeah.
I think, one of the things is that I think you raise a very, very important point there, actually, and something that perhaps I wasn't thinking about. But I think in years gone by, the looting was done by wooden ships, and today the looting is done with aircraft carriers, and F-16s and tornadoes and the Eurofighter or whatever. The things have changed, but the looting is still going on. You're quite right, and it's quite sort of it's quite a poignant point that you make, which is that we will see one man, an African American or an Asian or whatever it might be, a person of color who smashes into a shop and takes a flat screen TV that's worth $500, and will condemn him and condemn the entire race for that single crime or for those group of crimes done by a minority of people. And we won't look at the looting that's happening with all these aircraft carriers and the F-16s and the daisy cutter bombs and what have you. And that, I find that also very astonishing when people talk about Islam and Muslims and beheadings and cutting off of hands and things like that. And I say to people that we have decapitated and incinerated more innocent people with our bombs from 30,000 feet than these lunatics, this minority, this handful of lunatics, and what they've done to a people. But I'd like to move the conversation a little bit forward, and how do we combat racism? How do we change this perception and this action or inaction that we have to try to tackle it? And my personal views are that we've tried lots of things. So we've tried demonstrations, we've throwing stones, swinging sticks, waving hands and fists and flags and all sorts of things. And I believe that it hasn't worked. And we've got people who are incredibly educated and sophisticated. People would look at them as very refined, and yet they still have incredible levels of racism. And so for me, really, I feel that the only real solution as a widespread antidote, a widespread medicine that can actually cure this cancer, this deep-rooted, vile disease of the heart and the soul, is actually Islam. Because I think we're told that the first racist was Shaitan, was Satan. Because when Allah told Satan to bow to Adam, he said that I am better than he. I'm created from fire, he's created from dust, from clay. And so I heard a scholar actually say that racism, its very roots come from a satanic belief and a satanic trait. And so we have so many teachings within Islam, and I know that we've spoken about them as well, and Imran and I have sort of alluded to them as well, and I find that these teachings are so fundamental, actually, that if people were to adhere to them, that it would actually be a real transformation in how people behave towards one another. And as we say, in England, we've got this wonderful saying, the proof in the pudding is in the eating. And if we look at what happened at the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and how the black man or the different race or tribe were treated, and in particular the black person, the African, how he was treated or she was treated in Arabia, we see an incredible transformation because of the influence of the Quran and of the Hadith, the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And what my argument actually is that the first recorded leader, or influencer that completely turned racism on its head and completely outlawed it, and had explicit statements of equality and explicit statements of how vile and disgusting this tribalism, racism is the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we find, for example, very profound teachings, for example, in the Quran, where Allah says, "O mankind," in Surah Al-Hujurat, verse 13, "O mankind, we have created you from a single male and a single female, and made you into nations and tribes that you may know each other. And the most honorable of you in the sight of Allah are surety, the righteous." And so it links righteousness to this concept of equality. And so for me, I think that the only solution really that we have today to completely eradicate racism is to go to this Islamic ideal and the Islamic teachings. What's your view on that, Imran and Respect?
Brother Respect, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the, because I came up a lot of I don't know if you've seen it, but in Speaker's Corner, there's a lot of propaganda that Islam is anti-black, Islam is racist. So that's one of I'd say the biggest things that I came across, like as an opposition when I defended Islam. So then, boom, I had to look into Islam now. And what I realized is what people were doing is they would use situations of maybe tribalism in Arabia where, Bangladeshi maids might get their nails in her hands, and or Egypt, or what's going on in Libya after it's been destabilized by the West, and they would use expressions of ignorance or jahiliyyah within the ummah and try to make it Islam. Do you get it? So,
yeah, absolutely.
So then, boom. This is what I had to look to the root. So then, when I look to the root now, obviously everyone knows the story of Bilal. May Allah be pleased with him. And obviously, it's always like the slave narrative is always at the forefront, and obviously the Azan. But I looked a bit deeper into Bilal, may Allah be pleased with him. And when I looked at the hadith, there was a time when someone called him the son of a black woman.
Abu Dar, yeah.
And I'm paraphrasing, but if I'm right, the Prophet condemned him and told him that he's in his jahiliyyah. He's still in the ignorance of the pagans who was there before. As we know, Bilal faced a lot of racism, and obviously in the So I love the fact that he was like so gentle that he would do the call to prayer, but also a warrior on the front line as well. and a lot of wicked man. You get me? You get.
Yeah. I mean, one of the reasons that Bilal radiallahu anhu was chosen was because of his strong, clear voice. I mean, he had a really nice, strong, clear voice, and that's one of the reasons that he was chosen. And it was a great. I mean, imagine standing on the Kaaba. I mean, subhanAllah, imagine. I mean, we when we're on the Umrah or we're on the Hajj, we try and get to touch the Kaaba. It's a great honor if you're lucky, you're blessed with that. Bilal radiallahu anhu was able to stand on the Kaaba himself. But even the Prophet, peace be upon him, I mean, if you go back in his lineage, even he's from an Egyptian origin, because his Hajar radiallahu anha, she was the wife of Ibrahim alayhi salam, and that's where the descent of the Arabs comes from. Yeah. She was from Egypt, so in Egypt, obviously, that means she was a black lady. And I mean, it's even within the lineage of the Prophet, peace be upon him. Yeah. And the Prophet, peace be upon him, went out of his way to call people who were holding racist views. The example that you gave, Brother Respect, is the Abu Dhar who referred to Abu Bakr who referred to Bilal in a way saying something like, "Oh, you son of a black woman," but in a derogatory way. And when the Prophet heard him, actually the way it's reported is that the Prophet got angry, and when although the Prophet turned away from Abu Dhar, and when Abu Dhar said, "Messenger of Allah, you turned away of something that you've been told about me," and the Prophet said that you have reproached Bilal about his mother. By the one who revealed the book to Muhammad, none is more virtuous than any other, except by righteous deeds. You have none but an insignificant amount. And this is again telling people that there's no, you can't. This is not allowed. And this, you've got to imagine, this is 1,400 plus years ago.
Yeah.
And the Prophet is teaching this to the people. And even there's a really beautiful verse in the Quran that I wanted to just sort of really, if you think about this, what's the point of having all these people from different backgrounds, different colors, different languages? In chapter 30, verse 22, it says, "And among his signs is the creation of the heavens and the earth, and the diversity of your language and your colors. Verily, in that are signs for people of knowledge." So this is one of the great signs from Allah. And literally, we are not. It's telling us that we're all our father is Adam. And we're told this quite. There's a hadith in, I think it's in Tirmidhi, and it says, I'm trying to paraphrase this. Verily, Allah created Adam from a handful which He took from the earth. So the children of Adam came in accordance with the earth. Some were red skinned, some were white skinned, some were black skinned, and whatever is in between. And so we all go back to one origin. And Adam, literally, I mean, the word means dark. That's what it means. We're all from Adam, who was dark. And this is fascinating. So we know that some of the prophets were black. Musa alayhi salam is described by the Prophet, peace be upon him, as being black. We know that Sulaiman alayhi salam is described as being black. So we have this within our narrative, particularly amongst the Muslims. And we're told specifically, none is better than anyone else except by your good deeds, your righteousness, your God consciousness. And that doesn't mean that there isn't people who are holding prejudice, because we have the ideal and then we have to apply it. And maybe we're not applying it properly. And because we do see people, even now, you go to a Pakistani mosque and someone might not like you because you're Bengali or because you're white or because you're black. They may treat you, but that's their problem. Yeah. And then that needs to be sorted out. It's not Islam that's doing this.
Yes, when people say, "God," sometimes I hear Muslims talk about racism in Islam, and I'll always correct them and I'll say that there's no racism in Islam. Racism is Jahiliyyah, and Islam is the cure, but not the rest of the world, even in the Ummah as well, because it's the lack of the practice of Islam and the remembering of the last sermon, and and enforcing it. You know what I'm saying? That's for everyone. And that's why even because, like, I'll give you an example, the Nation of Islam, they caught my ear because they're so active in the community. You know what I'm saying? Like, they do so much in the community, and sometimes even like what I've come across like this last couple of weeks is like, even when I say about doing stuff in the community, going to, like some people, some Muslims will come and question you, and like there's different understandings even within the Ummah. you know what I'm saying? What happened is, obviously, me, I could never deal with the white man being devil at the same time. That's the spot for me. Doing a blanket statement like that is crazy. Like, we got, like, for me, like, amongst black people, and I know a lot of black people are responding to racism. You know what I'm saying? It's not something that they just woke up one day and thought about other people. Like, they've had experiences with other people that make them feel like no one likes them, so why would we like anyone? Like, this is a genuine belief that even I may have held at one point, skeptical, very skeptical. But I never hated anyone. You know what I'm saying? I was just skeptical to trust people. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But then I think one of the main things that I've seen of recent is I've heard a lot of, you know, black Muslims talking to the Ummah, telling them, look, we need to change this, because like when a black revert comes in, and if he's not strong in the deen, because when you're giving in the dawah, you're not telling him about this. So he's coming in and then he's having certain experiences and then he's like, oh, and he's leaving out. Me, I was lucky because I had a good understanding of different politics, and I didn't join the deen for friends. That's the thing. I didn't, you know, some people become Muslim and there's a part in it that they want a social remit. I'm someone that's very comfortable on my own. You know what I'm saying? But like at the same time, I've met some of the best people I know, like and linked up with some of the best people I know through this journey as well. That's the thing. But what I see a dichotomy. I see, like, on one side, because I see my original experience of, like, when it comes to racism, there's a lot of Muslims who are very active. Yeah, like Muslims are like at the top over here. You know what I'm saying? But then what I realized is in the Ummah, there's still work to be done on the in-house. Haven't clocked for the people that ain't like them activists that I met originally. You know what I'm saying? But I think the more we speak about, I think one of the main problems I think I've come across is, even if man speaks about it, people get uncomfortable and feel like it's an attack. Like, we need to get that mindset gone and realize it's not an attack unless you're wearing the cap. You know what I'm saying? And if you wear the cap, you got work to do.
Yeah.
But if you don't wear the cap, you're not going to feel uncomfortable. Jordan doesn't feel uncomfortable in any way when I talk about racism. Me and him have so many conversations. The reason why is because he doesn't have that in his heart. Me and Abbas, when I met him, we were speaking about racism. He's not going to feel uncomfortable, even if I tell him about racism I've experienced, even in his own community. He's not going to get personal and start to get all things. He's going to say, yo, how do we change this? What? You know what I'm saying? And once we get to that level, then I personally believe that, like, once the Ummah gets to that level, that is when, like, it's a force to not be rivaled with. You know what I'm saying? And then that is the whole world. That's when it's an example for the whole world. And you know what I'm saying? Like, when I look into the deen and I look into the son of the Prophet, peace be upon him, if Muslims applied it, oh my gosh.
Subhanallah.
You know what I'm saying? As a collective, that's why obviously the first 3 generations was the best, in it. You know what I'm saying? But if we apply, and that's what I want to come and bring to the table, because I'm not scared to. I see certain black Muslims, they don't even want to say exactly what they're going, because they don't want to make a next man feel uncomfortable. And I'm like, no, we don't have to, like, someone feeling uncomfortable for half an hour in this conversation in EFDawah isn't more uncomfortable than the lifetime of dealing with these stuff. So, like, sometimes we might have to have uncomfortable conversations, but that is how you make progress in it. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
And if it's done with the intention of improvement and, you know, getting closer to the teaching of the Prophet, peace be upon him, then that can only be a good thing, right?
100%.
And you know, the thing is that the reason why I'm saying that, and perhaps some non-Muslim viewers will be thinking, well, it's a very arrogant position to have, that only Islam has the true answer to this evil, to this problem. And the reason I think why I'm saying that is that as Muslims, we regard that Allah's words and the explicit and authenticated sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, are absolutes. There's no room for maneuver. You can't rationalize it in any different way. You can't say, well, you know what, I can feel this about a black person because of these reasons, or I can feel bad about, have bad feelings about an Asian person or a Chinese person because of these reasons. Well, for us, these are absolute teachings, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for example, says that this is forbidden, that this is haram, if one abides by those teachings, and of course it depends whether you do abide by those teachings or not, there's no room for maneuver. You can't excuse your actions. You can't sort of say, well, you know, I can still be a bit racist. Whereas if you look at other systems, you see, there's always some room for having a subjective analysis or view when it comes to being racist. But I believe within Islam, if you follow it properly and you follow the explicit teachings of the Quran and of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, they become sort of absolutes. There's no room for maneuver. And so I just want to sort of relate to one hadith that really does stand out, and a couple of hadith, if I may. You know, one of the hadith, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he said, and remember, these are 14 centuries ago. You know, people did not have this concept where they could even say to their people that it was wrong to be racist, because the people would have literally, you know, turned their backs on them. But the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, explicitly gave these teachings to his people. And in fact, we say to the world, you know, O people, you are all from Adam. And Adam was made from dust, as Imran alluded to, I think the same one. And no Arab is to be preferred over a non-Arab except by virtue or his piety. And therefore, the focus was away from color and away from tribe. But in fact, it was your piety, your actions were what defined you, whether you were close to God, whether you were observant to God's teachings, God's orders, basically. And another hadith, you know, Allah does not look at your images or your colors, but he looks at your hearts, your intentions, in other words, and your deeds. And creatures are the dependents of Allah, and the closest among them to Allah are indeed the most useful in his dependence, to his dependence. So in other words, this whole concept of color having any importance to judge anyone, and you've alluded to the story about Bilal radiallahu anhu, and subhanallah, it's an explicit teaching. There's no room for maneuver. You know, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, as Imran said, you know, became angry. And then he links racism to jahiliyyah, to ignorance, that you still have jahiliyyah, you still have ignorance. And so for us Muslims, we need to really, and I say these to my brothers and my sisters, I say it to myself, to advise myself first, that whenever, if ever, there is this inclination that you see something amongst a group of people, or you see something amongst a particular race, if you start having feelings of racism or bigotry towards those people, recognize that those whispers that come into your heart are from shaitan. It is Sheikh Yasir Qadhi actually says that these concepts of racism, of bigotry, are satanic. They're from shaitan. So say, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, that I seek refuge, Ya Allah, from Satan, the outcast, and reflect upon what you're thinking and really reprogram yourself and say that Allah would not be pleased in me thinking in this way, because this goes explicitly and completely against the very core message and teachings of Islam. And I think that's why fundamentally Islam has a huge part to play. And that's why, alhamdulillah, I know that we do have mosques that are predominantly Bengali or predominantly Pakistani, but generally that's not an issue where others are not welcome. And alhamdulillah, we don't have churches like, you know, for black people and for white people and for, you know, we don't have that in Islam. Predominantly, you go to America, for example, you go to a lot of the mosques in America, black people, Asian people, African American, Afro-Caribbean, whatever. People, alhamdulillah, a black man will read Salah on my right, you know, a white person will read Salah on my left, subhanallah. You know, there's no issue about that, and there shouldn't be. And so you're quite right that it can become an uncomfortable conversation, and people perhaps don't like to reflect upon it. and they like to sort of maybe say, well, this is an embarrassment. But I don't feel that we should brush anything under the carpet. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not brush these things under the carpet. We do need to challenge them, and we do need to work within our own communities, and we need to work within the wider community as well. This is a very corruptive, destructive, corrosive, damaging, trait to have, and that we need to all unite, regardless of color, creed, and religion, I would say, and fight this thing head on, because what we are seeing around the world and what we have seen throughout history should really teach us that nothing good comes out of the seeds of racism and fascism. You only get very thorny, very bitter fruits coming out of this, and we really do need to concentrate that and fight it. And alhamdulillah, we have amazing teachings within Islam. We have the perfect example, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that we can look to, we can turn to, we can get inspiration from, and hopefully, inshallah, work and eradicate this from our own communities, inshallah, and the wider community, the global community.
That's big facts, still big facts. And even me, so what I was doing today, linking up with so much different people from so many different people to stand against racism, I think that's like that's the best I can do. That's me trying to pray. Obviously, I send out my doers, tie my camel and trust in Allah, innit? So
Absolutely.
I know the situation ain't just gonna change from man just sitting down. You know what I'm saying? Especially me. I've been an activist from a long time ago, but like there was a time when obviously there's so much different opinions out there. There was a time when and this is why I didn't know if it was even for me, because there was a time when certain man was acting like me being an activist and being very vocal about racism. That might have an issue with being a Muslim. Do you know what I'm saying? And yesterday I had, there's some young guys online, innit? You know what I'm saying? They're just learning, innit? So sometimes they say things like, oh yeah, you can't, if there's Christians there, you can't link up with Christians. I'm like, yo, my mom's Christian, what are you talking about?
Subhanallah. Okay, guys, I just wanted to say that look, it's nearly 2 hours, so we do need to close the stream. But inshallah, is there any last words, Imran? Jordan, I'd like you to sort of come in as well, because I know, mashallah.
I felt it's because I'm white. I'm being kept out of the conversation.
Sorry, Jordan. Have you been sorry. Subhanallah.
No, I'm just kidding. No, look, to me, it's been fascinating listening to all of your personal experiences. I know from watching Respect, and even just in general, people hear these experiences, and you see this. I was saying on my video about this outrage on social media. Everyone says Black Lives Matter. We all stand together. Yet weeks go by and nothing's changed. We're talking back from Malcolm X's day when they took his father and they tied him to a train track, and now we've even still got instances like George Floyd, and so it's hard to know where it changed. And one thing for me, reflecting on myself, I feel. We all look through the world through a lens, and I feel like I've looked through a lens most of my life, very much from a white Western point of view, and so I've been conditioned to very much that the world is how I see it, but not only the world is how I see it, that's how everyone else is supposed to see it, because I am from that, and I feel that unless people can start seeing it from other perspectives, which I don't feel will happen. Like Respect said, I've seen him speak about things, and people come on and try and interrupt him. I don't really see that when other groups of people talk. But if you see a group of black men together saying something, you'll see people come and sort of try and disrupt the conversation. Mm-hmm. And I don't really know why that is, and it's tough to know where it's going to change, but I do feel like it's a very deep rooted thing, isn't it? It's conditioned into our schools, into parts of our daily life, and so yeah, it's like I say, it's fascinating listening to everyone's everyone's personal experience, and hopefully more people can actually take it on board. Hopefully people can actually see, you know, from George Floyd, and to be honest, I hope there is an outrage. Obviously, I think the looting, for me personally, I reckon the looting, I was watching the news this morning and they were showing the same guy over and over again stealing the same TV. And I'm thinking there are probably thousands of people there, but they're showing, they're trying to show me that there's a bunch of looters there. And I think the looting is, whilst it's bad, is probably minuscule compared to why aren't they showing the march of people standing together? It's kind of, everyone's had enough of this, but you don't see that. And the worry is that people will all get together and react, and then it will just be brushed under the carpet as every other situation's been. So, well, look, hopefully in the future things can change, and
inshallah.
Would you like to? I really wanted to say. So, I think one thing that Raspek said was that when he was on the march today, he saw lots of youth there, and I think that is a hopeful thing. And I think the youngsters are much better at seeing the fallacy of dividing ourselves or segregating ourselves by race, or having superiority complex or inferiority complexes by race, and that bodes well for the future. And I definitely do think that as an individual, what we can do is check our own selves, check our own biases. So if I am suddenly checking, making sure my wallet's in a secure place when I'm walking down the road and there's a person of, maybe a black origin, walking, I've got to say to myself, well, why am I doing that? I've really got to be, we've got to check ourselves to make sure that we're not having these biases within us, our prejudices within us. And then when we're interacting with people, we have to deal with them on a human level, because we're all the same. And that comes from our religion. So it comes back to applying your religion with the spirit that it was meant to be, and looking at somebody and seeing them for who they are. They are, when you're looking at another individual, they're another human being, and they are you. And I could have been born to an African mother in Africa. I could have died before the age of 5. I could have been anywhere, but Allah happened to put me here. I didn't have a choice in who I am. This is who I am. And other people didn't have a choice in who they are. This is who they are. And we are told that we are all the same. So we shouldn't take an accident, which is for us, something we have no control over, as a sign of somehow we are different or superior to other people. Because this is Allah putting us in these positions, and it's highlighting for ourselves that we are. It's like the as Allah says in the Quran, that He made us this way and made the variety this way, because it's a sign for people to understand. And may Allah give us the tawfiq to check our own biases and to maybe treat each other as we're meant to treat each other.
Respect, would you like to add anything on the closing?
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me on. Firstly, it's been a really good conversation. Normally, when I'm having conversations about racism, Jordan knows I got to scream down the face because people are just saying, people are just being quite offensive. Like,
everyone's 10%, isn't it? That was the quote. Someone came on and interrupted Raspek and they said, "Look, mate, what you need to understand is every race has 10% of racist people, and it's all the same." I think that was kind of very interesting.
I get all sorts of comments that really wind me up, and the reason why, even the other day, we was talking about George Floyd, and someone started talking about Palestine and Syria, and I'm like even that, I find it disrespectful. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, when it's time to talk about Palestine, I've been on the Palestine marches. I'm not going there to tell them about what's going on in Nigeria. You know what I'm saying? Like, let's deal with one at a time. Like, we know Palestine is the biggest open prison in the world. You know what I'm saying? And that is definitely something that anyone who, even when you look to Palestine and Syria, they was doing murals for brother George Floyd. Both of them, they done murals. And for me, that really touched me. Even a lot of people from oppressed places. For me, I'm with the oppressed people all around the world. You know what I'm saying? I'm with the oppressed, and I'm fighting against the oppressor. What I think is, I think Brother Imran touched on a big point, which is that none of us didn't choose what we're born as. So for us to judge each other based upon it, it doesn't make any sense. You know what I'm saying? And at the same time, it's really God that chose what we was born as. So we got to be proud of what we are. That's why I was made in different tribes to get to know each other. You can't get to know anyone else if you don't know your own tribe. And that's why, me and Jordan get on. We click we click so well. You know what I'm saying? And he's proud of who he is. I'm proud of who I am. You know what I'm saying? And there's no clash. And I'd say, like, for me, as much as I might go through negative scenarios with different people from loads of different places, you know what I'm saying? Like, that all seems to be trumped when me and Jordan are arm in arm at Issa's burial. Do you know what I'm saying? Like that experience there was like, I can't explain the feeling in it. You know what I'm saying? So regardless of all the differences that we might have, like, one thing we connected on is that we have both had the same love for brother Issa. You know what I'm saying? I love Chana. So
I mean,
so in conclusion, I think I'm waffling a bit, but
no, not at all.
In conclusion, I think what Imran said about us not choosing what we're born as, and even there's a woman called Jane Elliott, she does a lot of stuff against racism. When they asked her if she's ashamed to be white, she said, no, I didn't choose it. You know what I'm saying? But if she didn't take responsibility. None of us should feel responsible for this, what we're living in, but we all, every single one of us, especially Muslims, yeah, it's the duty to take responsibility and be that light for the rest of the world. Like, when I look at the Sunnah, I look at it as a light to the rest of the world. And one thing I love about EFDawah is sometimes you go other places, and obviously some people are young and immature, but like there's this thing where like people feel like you have to be aggressive or negative to other people to do dawah. It makes no sense. It's just reverse dawah. And one of the best things about over here is that even if we agree or disagree on everything, no one agrees on everything, but there's a mutual respect. And from each one of you, I've seen that, like, that character that no matter who it is, it could be a Muslim or a non-Muslim, they can look at you and say, yo, I like this guy, you know, but let me hear what he's got to say. What makes him like that? What makes him so peaceful? What makes him so calm? What gives him sabr? Well, how does he get hikmah? Like, these things are the beauties of Islam, and that's what I feel like a lot of people watching this, that's what they'll get from it, and that's what a lot of people should try and emulate to them. And even brother Issa had that same sort of energy, that good manners. You know what I'm saying? Adab and akhlaq. You know I'm saying good manners, piety. These are all things. So yeah. In conclusion, enough love for having me, EFDawah. I haven't looked at the chat all the time since I've been here because I didn't want to get triggered. But love it.
A lot of big ups.
Yeah, Jazakallah Khair. Thank you very much. And it's been quite difficult to get you on, Respect. We've been wanting to get you on for quite a while, so we feel quite privileged that you've honoured us.
Absolutely, we're honoured
by coming on, and we'd really love to have you on again. For there's so many topics, inshallah, that we've got up and coming. My closing really is something that Imran and both you said as well, which is that, you know, we didn't choose to be born black or white or whatever. And in fact, the amazing thing is that the ruh, the soul that Allah placed in us, we're not told that it has a color of a black man or a white man. And when that departs our body, when our soul, our life force, if you want to say, if you're not religious, departs our bodies, the very essence of who we are is not a color. And the body that we value, the color, the pigment on our skin that we value, will rot away in our graves, will be insignificant, will be worm food. So what is this concept that we have, that this temporary vessel that happens to be a different color somehow is superior to some other color? It's completely illogical. As the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, it's a sign of jahiliyyah, a sign of ignorance, that you can't contemplate, understand, reflect, that these things don't actually matter. The other thing that I want to say humbly, without trying to say that my opinion is the only opinion that matters and it's somehow overarching and overreaching, but my humble opinion to my brothers of color, of who are white, who whatever they are, and they want to fight racism, that, you know, I understand the reaction, and I can understand that the reaction to racism is important if it's done within what we would all see as a reasonable reaction, i.e. that it doesn't become a criminal activity of destruction or whatever. I understand that. But I think we as a global community need to realize that the real war, the real battle against racism is not going to be necessarily the shouts and the screams and the anger, but actually it's going to be the battle within the intellect and intellectuals battles. And that's why we see Martin Luther King, and we see Malcolm X, and we see Muhammad Ali, in America, having such a great influence and being so pivotal in causing change, not just by being angry, not just by being vocal, but because they use their intellect. And so we need to educate ourselves as a people as to how we can come together with like-minded people who detest this very vile and cancerous, dangerous concept, and how we can intellectually engage and make changes within the political situations, within the policing, for example, within how society as a whole generally is constructed, and change it from the power base. And I'll give you a very practical example of what we did here in Ilford North, for example. We had certain MPs that we were not happy with because we felt they were very anti-Islam. And we felt that, we came together collectively and we turned over a majority of 5,000, and we got somebody in that we think was not just better for the Muslims, not just better for the Asian people, what was better for everybody, the white, the black, the Muslim and the non-Muslim. And we caused that change. And I was not actually, I don't want to claim any sense of achievement on my part, because the only thing I did was vote. I didn't actually construct or was active within that change. But we did that change. We made that change, or rather the people who were very active made that change, because they got the like-minded people together and we made that change, and things did actually, I feel, change for the better. And so we, as people of color and of no color, we need to educate ourselves. We need to organize ourselves. We need to educate our children, and we need to get, spend as much time with our children as we possibly can, because they are going to be the people who are actually going to hopefully change things for the better. I'm 51 years old. Yes, I can do certain things. I can make certain changes, but hopefully it'll be my children and their children that we need to really educate and have them excel in education and get them into those careers, get them into those jobs. And I'm not saying it's easy, but we need to do that, hopefully. And inshallah, if we do that, then I think we can actually hopefully see some real change happening in the future. I don't want to belittle people's reaction. I fully understand that, when this is happening, we have to react, but we need to be organized. We need to be planning, looking for the long term as well.
I think that's just quickly. I think that's what I really liked about like Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali and these men, because not only could they be involved in activism, but when they debated with these racist guys, they would break them down and expose every thought inside them. Like tomorrow, I'm going head to head with, the Islamophobe James Goddard.
Oh gosh!
Yeah, tomorrow we're clashing heads again still, because but like that's where I feel like breaking down these man's arguments on that level, and even taking it to a higher political level in the future. Obviously, these men are like training ground. But even politically, taking the arguments, like Malcolm X's, he's debating Oxford. It's like one of my favorite videos. He went into Oxford University, and you would think he was an Oxford student, the way that he articulated himself. So yeah. I just want to say that quickly, but I know we got a lock off. But big up EFDawah. Enough love to everyone in the chat. And from your brother Respect, assalamu alaikum.
Jazakallah Khair. Wa alaikum assalam.
Brother, lovely to speak to you.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Assalamu alaikum. That was a good, but I wanted to say something actually before we go, because I think we should almost do a part 2 on this topic. I really enjoyed. I think we've touched on many, and I think the first part of the next one should be marriages. Should be we didn't touch on that one. All right, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.